Hello, everyone. My name is John Stitt. So this is a panel about LGBTQ2 diversity and intersectionality of identities. I'm going to let them introduce themselves because we have literally only 30 minutes for the three of them. So here we go.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Muhammad Ashan, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. And I am a newcomer to Canada. I just came here in 2016. And I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on Treaty 1 land, the traditional territory of Anishinaabe, Cree, Dene, Dakota, Oji Cree nations, and the homeland of Métis Nation. So I'm not going to get into much detail about my introduction. It will take more than 30 minutes to do that. I'm just kidding. So I was just saying that when I came here in 2016, it was March 2016 when I arrived here, and I was born and raised in Pakistan. 2016 was the year when, in June, Orlando shooting happened. And how many of you in this room are aware of what happened in Orlando shooting? So I'm not going to get into the history of that. So now imagine the situation of a newcomer Pakistani immigrant who identifies as Muslim as well as queer, and now stuck in the middle of this social media and mainstream media criticism of and expression of homophobia as well as Islamophobia. But I was like, oh my God, what is happening? Because there were people who were criticizing the shooter, who also had a Muslim name. I'm not going to say that he was Muslim because, honestly speaking, those are not the Islamic values that mainstream media tells everyone about. And then there was a huge intersection of LGBTQ community who were making an uninformed comment about, and it was coming from the space of pain, but they were also criticizing the Muslim community. But then there was a ray of hope that the joint statement from Canadian LGBTQ centers that condemned the homophobia. Also, they condemned the Islamophobia, and they said, like, I still remember the statements. Highlight was that we strictly condemn the fact that Islamic community is being made into a scapegoat, where the gun control is the real problem. So, so don't try to make Islamic community a scapegoat. And then another positive thing happened was that Islamic Social Services, reached out that year to a Rainbow Resource Center. That was my first employer here in Canada. Well, technically not first, it was my third employer, but first full-time job. So I was able to meet Omar and other members who were involved with Islamic Social Services, and it was a very good synergy that happened. And now mind that, like, I was not out publicly when this all was happening. Now my public outing to the rest of the world happened in 2018 when CBC did an article on me talking about my experience, and of course I was taking over Pride Winnipeg as their new president. And that just opened the whole Pandora box of homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia. And what bothered me more was not the homophobia of Muslim community, because I was used to that. I live in a country where I knew that Muslim community will express homophobia, and I was kind of thick-skinned towards that. What bothered me more was the Islamophobia in queer community. The way my LGBTQ2SQ plus community members failed to see that there is a possibility of somebody being very religious as well as trying to balance their gender identity or sexuality. But also there was another thing that was coming at play, that I was a good speaker. I don't really speak well anymore. And I was very well accepted in Islamic community in Canada for my ability to speak publicly. So like I was invited to family gatherings and community centers to come and speak on religious occasions. But the moment that announcement went public, the doors started closing. And the painful part was that I tried to reach out to almost every community support group. Some of you are sitting here around me, but I did not get any support. Because it was a Muslim community organization, with exception of Islamic Social Service, because they were there from the day one, and I'm thankful for Umar's support on a personal level. But then all the doors were closed because, oh, we don't really want to engage because you identify as queer. But at the same time, the queer spaces were also closing their doors because they don't want to engage in a dialogue, because now I am president of Pride Winnipeg, and that's a position of privilege. So of course, overlooking and just suspending all the other challenges this president position may be experiencing on personal level, people decided to just shut all the doors. And I decided that, okay, fine, if you're going to do that, I have been resilient forever in my life, so I'm going to come out more resilient. And yes, if you want to rub that in my face that I have privileges, yes, I am proud of those privileges, but at the same time, the problem is that I have challenges too. And that's why today when if you read in my bio, I'm not talking about my experiences with Pride or like what I do with Pride. I wanted to speak as a person today, because this is my space. I see so many familiar faces around me, so many people who have been through, who have been there during my struggle, people who reached out to me, they knew that what I will be going through, people who were preparing me for this day. But then there's a big problem. The balance of intersectionality is a big challenge. We cannot pick and choose. I cannot pick that today I'm going to represent myself as queer, and then tomorrow I'm going to represent myself as Muslim, and then day after tomorrow I will be a brown South Asian, and then maybe later day I will represent myself as a newcomer. All these pieces are pieces of my identity. And it's not just me as an individual. There are many others out there who struggle the same situations every day. And the reason why we are not able to speak is that we don't really feel that these are our spaces. The moment you try and take up spaces, we are told that this is not your space because you're Muslim, and this is a queer space. Or this is not your space because you identify as queer, and this is a Muslim space. So where will I go as an individual? Where is my identity? I don't want to get rid of any pieces of my identity, because all that matters. We had that discussion. I'm so excited that we had a similar discussion with University of Winnipeg when there was a call to conversation, and we talked about that. My faith is equally important to me, as important as my gender identity or my sexuality. And none of that can be removed from my identity. I don't expect anyone to see me in silos. I, as an individual, is somebody who has all these pieces of identity, and all these play a very important role. But at the same time, I'll just go back a little bit more. There's no written script, like I just had the treaty acknowledgement written and then some pointers. And please tell me when I have 2 more minutes. Okay, great. Because I can take the whole space and continue forever. But I'm not going to do that today, don't worry. So there's another challenge. Like when I was in Pakistan, here's a big thing. Like I am using Pakistan, and again, I'm very careful not using the country's name, because the moment I start using the country's name, it hits social media and mainstream media, and I receive criticism from back home, and I don't want that to happen as well. So like when I was in Pakistan, the reason why I chose to come to Canada was because I was running from homophobia. And I was like, I'm going to land in Canada. I will just land at Toronto airport, and I would say like, hey, I'm queer, and the whole airport will burst into a flash mob and welcome me. That did not happen. And you know what all else did not happen? All the things I dreamt of did not happen. For the first 2 years, my 2016 and 2017, I struggled to create space, room for me like, in a very subtle way, in a very hush-hush way, that was not working for me. And I'm not the kind of person who can just stay quiet and try to, make room for myself and people who are with a similar challenges. So I said, like, okay, now it's time to roll up my sleeves and then, like, take over what I think I should have done earlier. So, but the problem is that now I'm not just combating homophobia. I'm now combating racism. I'm combating xenophobia. I'm combating Islamophobia. And, it's coming from the people who should, for the first, in the first place, they should be able to understand the pain of marginalization, the pain of being cornered. I'm just going to share one very interesting experience, and then I will, just be quiet. So recently, India decriminalized LGBTQ identities, and I was very excited. And I, shared a tweet that was shared by someone, and then I improved on that tweet because I felt that that tweet has very limited understanding. So I add a lot of historical elements into it, and I posted on a social media group. I don't normally post publicly about these things because of my safety and concerns about my friends in Pakistan. So I posted about that. And immediately I was roasted by my own community members for taking voice from people who should be speaking about it, not understanding that the context is that my own ancestors were forced out of Indian land and was forced, and we were forcefully displaced from India in 1947, and we were forced to go back. Like, in fact, forced to a new place where we never lived and belonged. That was the city of Karachi. And not understanding the context, people still chose to, just jump to a conclusion that you are from Pakistan, you should not be speaking for India. And I'm just giving one incident. There are multiple incidents that I can really, really go on and on. People don't understand the context. And what bothers me more is when you have experienced marginalization, when you speak about marginalization, when you claim to be these, sole voices of solidarity and resilience, how on earth you suspend the voices of others who may have some kind of context to speak about? How do I choose not to be an Indian? How do I choose to be just a Pakistani? When, like, I still have families on both sides of the border. When I still have graves of my ancestors on the land that is now called India. For me, it's coming to a point where I feel that maybe I made a mistake coming to Canada. Because the activists, the community in Canada, be it just Muslim community, be it just LGBT community, anyone, I know I'm going to face the backlash of what I'm about to say. But I'm done with this. And I've been stopping myself from booking a ticket and go back to Pakistan because there I was just facing homophobia. Just one thing. And here, every day is a struggle. Every day is a battle. Every day I have to, like, every moment I see something happening, I have to think, oh my God, there is a connection, and I'm going to face the consequence. And do you think it's fair? Do you think it's fair without reaching directly and actually asking for a clarification, jumping to conclusion, and cornering individuals who are trying their level best to fight so many challenges? I rest my case. Thank you very much.
I was supposed to go second, and I just tried to punk her a little bit there. Just a little prank. Thank you, Mohammed, for sharing that. Yeah, I know there are many reasons why that was difficult, so thank you for sharing that. My name is Uzoma. I hear I was introduced earlier today by my friend Nahani, so thank you, Nahani, for that introduction. So, intersectionality. So I'm one of the folks who started an initiative in Winnipeg called QPOC Winnipeg a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And we created QPOC because, well, honestly, we created QPOC largely out of desperation and frustration. living in a city where we felt it was mostly, I think of the four of us, three of us, all black, all queer. And we started QPOC because there was nowhere in the city where we could go. Not that we felt we could go, there was literally no place in the city that we could go where we felt safe, where we felt represented, where we felt respected as queer and black people. So if we went to, you know, what I might say is like a black club or a black restaurant, there's discomfort at times being openly queer or openly gay or gender non-conforming. Going to spaces that were queer spaces, so clubs, get-togethers, whatever it is, there were always incidents of racism. And it wasn't once in a while, it was pretty much all of the time. Could be something as for some folks, you know, seemingly insignificant as a song coming on and people looking at me and telling me to twerk because I'm black. And of course I would know how to twerk, which I do, but it's besides the point. Just kidding, I have no idea how to twerk. This has never been a thing I can do. So every time, you know, something like that would happen, it was ridiculous, and it's racist. It's one small example. So we decided, after getting together in safe spaces or our homes, that something had to be done. We took it upon ourselves to, you know, create an event, create a space where our community could come together and share as safely as possible as Two-Spirit and BIPOC folks, and just sharing community. And you know, that was an experience that was powerful, it was empowering, it was uplifting. It was also an experience in creating QPOC that changed the trajectory of my life. So initially I thought, you know, the scariest thing about creating QPOC would be booking a space, finding a DJ, sort of all the organizational things that I had no idea how to do. Getting on the phone and asking people questions about, you know, how do you set up a safer space? How do you organize an event? How do you staff an event? What time, like, when did they start? I wasn't really going out at that point, so I was like, when does it start? When does it end? I'm usually in bed by earlier than 2 a.m. So it was all the logistical things that made me nervous. What I didn't anticipate, even though I knew that racism was an issue in our queer communities, I didn't anticipate just how violent the backlash would be simply by creating a name, QPOC Winnipeg, Queer People of Color Winnipeg. I knew that my experiences were valid. We knew that our experiences were valid. We knew that intersectionality, you know, meaning the intersectional identities that can compound oppression that people experience, we knew that that was very real. We knew it was an issue in our communities. Other people did not want to hear that it was an issue in our community. And so with the creation of that name and an event came the realities of just how loudly people would speak and try and speak over our voices to have these issues raised, or to silence us rather. It created dynamics within communities of color where we were having conversations that we weren't having as openly before. So in talking about anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, talking about, you know, the dynamics that exist within our communities that we weren't totally discussing at the time, and recognizing that, you know, it wasn't just the racism that we were experiencing from white people, but actually there were conversations in communities of color that we weren't having in terms of how we keep ourselves safe, how we identify our oppressions, how we manage our oppressions, how we manage our relationships and navigate those dynamics. So it actually created far more than I had anticipated, and a lot more labor that never really stopped. It was like it became a 24/7 sort of presence in my life and in the lives of a couple of the other folks who were organizing. One of which moved to Toronto. I don't think that's why she moved. She had a great opportunity there. We miss her dearly. Sane, she's wonderful. But, you know, it opens something up in our communities and locally that, you know, I'm finding now, 5 years later, is a much more common conversation. There are other initiatives that are doing this work incredibly well. There are, you know, whole forums surrounding this one topic that even 5 years ago was something people were very resistant to engaging in. 2 minutes, okay. I feel it's very anti-Black of you to give me 2-minute warning, but it's fine. Just kidding. So, you know, I love that we are having these conversations, and I love that we're having these conversations within the context of 2S LGBTQ plus discourse, because, you know, as Mohammed mentioned, you would think, and a lot of people mistakenly think, that in communities where people are targeted, in targeted communities and marginalized communities, in vulnerable communities, that there's less space for this kind of dialogue, because we should just know better. We should engage in a healthier way, when in reality, you know, because of things like white supremacy, because of things like colonization, there's a lot of that conversation that we haven't been having and we have been avoiding. And it's essential for us to do that in spaces that, you know, we can control, in spaces that are determined by us, in spaces that are for us by us. And even now, in the work that we do, we still see some resistance to people understanding the importance of us having those spaces, the importance of being able to have those conversations where we can be free and without filters and without barriers and without fear, so that we can, as communities, you know, improve our solidarity and equip ourselves with the skills to navigate what are very, very messy times. So with all of that being said, I want to thank you for having me here today to speak on this panel with some pretty incredible people. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say. Welcome back to Winnipegger. We're very lucky to have you. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know that there's a lot else to say. I just first would like to start by, yes, I am a returning Winnipegger, born and raised on this land, though I'm a visitor and a settler. So returning after 20 years, I now call myself a visitor and have to be really reflective and mindful and thoughtful about returning to the place where I grew up. I left Winnipeg in the early 90s after experiencing much of what Uzoma shared, which was, as a person who was navigating a city, I wouldn't say newly queer, and I don't know that queer was the word that I used then. I don't really know what I was. All I knew was I loved people, I was attracted to people. I don't like bi. There's a lot of words that are out there, but I don't use those words. Now I identify as queer because that's a word that has been reclaimed, but it wasn't a word that was of my vocabulary, let's say in the 80s and early 90s. Yes, I'm older than Mohammed and Uzoma. I am. But that being said, being of the Caribbean background, religious parents, being out was not an option. So I did navigate Winnipeg in a very surreptitious way, trying to figure out who I was and where I could be. I also lived in Transcona, so that was another piece. And don't laugh. I saw people laughing. But that's another piece. So that piece around race and intersections of identity really, really ring true for me. So growing up, racism, you learn about it at a very early age when you come from particular communities in the city. So that piece, earlier Tony was on a panel and talked about that discomfort. I want to just say what we heard Mohammed share, and I know what Uzoma has shared, has probably been a little hard for people to hear in this room, and I think that's important. So we've had a lot of things today have been hard to hear, but when we talk about the intersections of queerness and race and the experience, the multiple multiply layered experiences that we have, and then the resilience, and I hate that word too, but that's the word that comes to mind about how we navigate. I come back to Winnipeg in 2018, and not a lot has changed. And I think for me, that is pretty sad. So I'm really proud of the work that QPOC has done. I am also proud of the work that Pride Winnipeg is embarking on in understanding that there is more to that flag than those colors that you see. And you know, we've seen, in fact, in Toronto, we've added colors. We've added brown and black to the Pride flag to show that the community is much, much more representative. So coming from Toronto, and you'll see the shirt that I wear, Black Lives Matter, my partner and I don't go to Pride in Toronto. We haven't for years. We only go to the part of Pride that is for us, and that is Blockorama. And that is a space that was created for racialized people, for people's voices and our music and our culture to come through. And I've had the pleasure of playing Mass on the stage, so Carnival, for those of you who don't. For me, from Trinidad, that was a really important moment for me, to be able to be in costume, to be there and be up on a stage at Pride and be supported. Because that's not something I can necessarily do if I go back to Trinidad. I was born here, but that is still my root. So when you talk, Mohammed, about your experiences, it's conflicting, right? It's a conflicted place that we are, and we are on a daily basis. My partner jokes about, we live moments from Fort White and IKEA. She says that seems to be the only places queer people are. But queer white people, and mostly lesbians, I have to be frank, like, we are not reflected. To date, other than probably QPOC, there is not a place in Winnipeg that we can go and openly be who we are. So we have our, you know, we are a family. That's why we're at IKEA in Fort White. We hang out there because we have children. But the reality is, there's just not that many spaces for us. And we can't get childcare because we're new here, so we end up not partying at QPOC. So I've got to figure this out. Haven't been there yet. I have not said anything that I've written down, but what I guess that's just my story. We were asked to share 3 salient things, so I did try to do that in my notes. First, the thing I want to always say is to ask ourselves who's not here. So though we talk about LGBTQ, Q2+, and all of the other letters that go along with that acronym, trans inclusion is one. I can talk about the way that I don't feel included, but I know that there are very few, if any, places here, at least where I've been recently, that trans folks feel included. And so that's something that I need us to really think long and hard about. How do we include folks on our boards, in our staff teams, in our work, in our lives, in our churches, in our mosques? Where do they go? Where can they fit in? Really, really important. Disability is another. So when I talk about intersectionality, I think those intersections of disability, and not just what's visible, but what is invisible, is really important. I guess I put leadership down because I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that I came back to Winnipeg to take on the role of executive director at Women's Health Clinic. And it is a real pleasure and opportunity to be there. I was a volunteer and staff person at Women's Health Clinic in the late 80s and early 90s. And I guess, like I said, not a lot has changed. So I came back to this organization. It is still very white, lots of gay people. I'm not gonna argue there. But the reality is feminism and white feminism, and we've had a panel about feminism, doesn't again reflect my experience and the experience of the people that come through our doors. So change needs to happen. Uzoma is on the board of directors at Women's Health Clinic, but I would say one of now 4 or 5 racialized people on our board, which is a huge jump, and that has come from a lot of work, not just by me, but certainly the board has intentionally done that work. But making sure that the decision makers in our organizations, again, not only reflect race and indigeneity and queerness, but also, again, those other pieces about disability and trans identity. So we're working on that, but again, I'm so proud to have those voices at the table because it does make a difference. It makes a huge difference, as Nahani spoke about, when the leadership in our legislative buildings also struggle with gender, period, let alone, I think she said, to date, 6 female identified cisgendered women in the legislature. So that was shocking to me, right? I wrote the numbers down. 834 men, 60 women, and to date only 5 racialized women. Wow, 2019, and I've got 1 minute, okay. 2 last things, kindness and generosity. It's okay to make mistakes, because I know one of the things about gender and sexuality is people are always pronouns and tripping over acronyms. It's okay to make mistakes. I'll just share quickly my own experience. So I'm a queer parent. I've given birth to 2 of our 3 children. My partner's given birth to our 3rd. When our second child was a little guy still, I went to a conference and there was a mom at our table and we were just chatting and she said, "Oh, I'm so tired. I was up with the baby." And you know, when you meet somebody who I didn't read her as anything, to be honest, but we were in a space where we were in community. I said, "Oh, you have a child." It's really rare you hear people talk about children when you're at conferences and work-related things. I said, "How old's the baby?" And she said, 6 weeks old. And I looked at her, I said, "Oh, wow, good for you. You're back at work already." And as the words came out of my mouth, I tried to pull them back in because here I was, somebody who had birthed 2 children with a queer partner, and we hadn't had our 3rd yet. I assumed, because we live in a heteronormative world, my socialization, regardless of my own lived experience as a queer parent, assumed that she gave birth, right? And so as the words came out, I pulled them back in. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally assumed you had the child." It also didn't make room for an adoptive parent, like any number of things. She said, "Oh, it's okay. You're queer. It's okay. It's okay. You're fine." I said, "So if a straight person said it, you'd be mad at them?" She's like, "Yeah, totally." So, but I think it's important to make those mistakes because by making those mistakes without harm, of course, and understanding that in another situation that could have been harmful, she showed me kindness and she showed me generosity. And in that mistake, I also learned a lot about myself and also how I form even these ideas about people despite my own experiences. And the last thing I just wanted to say is be bold and be brave. I also heard someone else say that today. Wear your t-shirts with pride. My oldest son is 19. He's in school down in the States in Atlanta. Uzoma knows I have every opportunity to brag about him. I do. He's at a historically black college in the US. That being said, when I bought this t-shirt, he bought a sweater that said, "I can't breathe." And if you're not familiar with the reference, it is the reference to Black Lives Matter and the work with Eric Garner. When Eric Garner was when he was dying and the police were holding him in a chokehold, he said, "I can't breathe." And my son wore this sweater in his warm-ups before a basketball game, and a referee came up to him and told him he had to take it off. And he looked at him and he said, "Why?" And he says, "Well, you can't wear that here." And again, this is back to the kneeling, right? All of the things that happen when people are kneeling during the anthems in the US. He looked at the referee and he said, "Well, I don't want to take it off." And he actually teed him out before the game even started. And so I always taught my sons to be bold and to be brave and to speak your truth. And I think that's what I'd like to leave you with, is to really keep him in mind, keep all of the people around us in mind, keep Muhammad in mind. Please stay. Don't book that ticket. Keep Uzoma in mind when you run for that seat, and just really support the people around you. What's that? That's right, number 7. That's what I'm gonna give you a shirt that says number 7 on it. That's right. Thank you all for listening.